On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
This is Bonjour Chai, the Hasid or Hipster edition. I'm Avi Finegold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltzbovy. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we are talking to Mik Moore about golden ages of Jewish culture, whether we are poised to have a new one, and whether Heeb magazine can make it happen.
Avi, what was Heeb magazine?
I guess the way that I describe it, and like as pithy as possible, was that it was Vice but for Jews, and like that same tone of irreverence and that same level of like, we're just going to say whatever we want but point out different subcultures, and in this case it was the Jewish one, and it had a big impact on me.
The Jewish subculture,
the idea of Judaism as being part of like its own culture and proud to talk about however it expresses itself, and not just in this like orthodox, go to synagogue, come home, keep kosher, all of that stuff. That Heeb magazine showed me that there was a world of opportunities and ideas that weren't necessarily mine, but that could be Jewish. Other people were getting their Judaism out of it, and I really loved it. So I was excited to find out that it is being resurrected. I wanted to chat with the guy who's bringing it back. So we are talking today to Mik Moore, who is the CEO and founder of Moore & Associates, a creative agency in New York. He is the mind behind many political and nonprofit campaigns, including the famous Great Schlep of 2008 with Sarah Silverman. He is also the president of the board of directors of Heeb Media, which is seeking to resurrect the Heeb magazine brand for a new generation. Mik, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Can you tell us, why is he being resurrected now, and why are you the person to be doing it?
Sure. This process started about 2 years ago when I accidentally learned that Heeb was no longer actively publishing new articles. I went to the Heeb website and realized that the last post was from April of 2019. And I was not involved with Heeb in its initial run. I knew a lot of the people who were involved, the founder, the second editor, the publisher, a number of the contributors, but I was not actually involved in it the first time. I was just a huge fan. And when I found out eventually through some conversations with the former publisher, what had happened, I got pretty excited about the possibility of reimagining Heeb for the 2020s. And I had been in magazine publishing, starting really in college, and then right out of college. That had been, my first love of print magazines, something that has not completely disappeared, but definitely faded from the centrality it had back in the 90s and 2000s during the heyday. And I have been sort of tracking media technology as it has emerged in new iterations over the last 30 years, and saw a real opportunity to, again, reimagine Heeb with the media technology of today, which is to say social media, web video, podcasting, right? These other sort of forms of media. And I also, I sort of began to pull people together, and there were actually a lot of interesting parallels between this period that we're in now and the period of the early 2000s when the original Heeb crew came together to start the magazine. So I'll leave it there, but the process has been going on for a couple of years, and we officially sort of relaunched with the website heebmedia.com back in February of this year.
So I wanted to talk about the parallels between this period of time and that period of time. The way I see it, there were like the long 2010s starting at about 2008 and going up to about 2022 and then, or 2023. And then there's kind of whatever now. But there does seem to be something that was different in the sort of like 9/11 to 2008 period. But I want to know how you see it. Like, what do you see as the parallels?
I mean, I've obviously now lived through both periods. In some ways, it can be hard to remember both the feeling immediately after 9/11 of just, real uncertainty. It was a really dark period. I think those of us living in the United States, I lived in New York City.
I was there in Manhattan. I'm from Manhattan and was there that day. So yeah.
Yeah, so was I. And it was both a scary period because very few of us had experienced that kind of a direct, attack. And then it was also a dark period because of the way the country responded. And then ultimately sort of where the Bush White House sort of took the country with the Iraq War, and then subsequently with the mortgage crisis and Hurricane Katrina. And it was just the 2000s were really a challenging period. And I think many of us thought that George Bush was the worst president that we had ever had and would ever have. We knew. Yeah, exactly. And it's a good lesson. And, just when you think things are at their worst, they can always get worse. And also just, this sense that I think that he brought to the table of trying to create a space that had humor, that was subversive, that had a real, energy to it, and even a sense of optimism, right, during a really dark time. And maybe the most important thing, a willingness to take risks. Literally, the decision to name the magazine Heeb was in itself taking a risk with a word that at the time still had, I think, the historic connotations as an anti-Semitic slur. There were a lot of people who were very upset with the name at the time, and a new generation, these were people in their early 20s that founded Heeb, really wanted to stake out some new ground. And that was a part of the sort of ethos, I think, that Heeb had in what it covered, the events that it held, its willingness to say things that other people weren't willing to say. And so, and where the parallels aren't exact, but I think in the sort of post-October 7th era, there's been a shift. And then with the second Trump administration, it feels very much like a dark period, a sort of new McCarthyism is how I would describe it. And I think one of the big differences, I will say, which is really interesting, is that if you talk to the founders of Heeb, I think they had grown up in the United States largely not experiencing anti-Semitism. And so the ability to reclaim a word like Heeb, which had been a slur, and turn it into, in the same way that the word queer was being sort of taken back by the gay and lesbian community, to take the word Heeb back was a real statement about what it meant to be an American Jew. And we're now in a period where there is overt anti-Semitism. And ironically, the word Heeb is largely unknown to the next generation. My kids are basically 18 and 22. And when I started talking to them about this project, they literally had never heard the word before, this word that was so scary to so many elders back 25 years ago. So interesting parallels and some interesting differences as well.
Did you know, by the way, speaking about the word, in my looking up stuff for the episode today, I found that he was quoted in a law review article. Do you know about this?
Yeah, there's a famous lawsuit that...
This isn't a lawsuit. This is a law student that wrote an article entitled NSFW, an empirical study of scandalous trademarks. This is from Texas A&M University. And it's like in the footnotes, along with like cocaine free, the legal alternative, meth, post tits, right? And then Heeb.
Yeah, but it came out because there was, in fact, a lawsuit which basically emerged around whether or not you could trademark a slur. Originally, basically what was said was you could not trademark a slur. Today, it's no longer an issue. There was a lawsuit connected to the Washington Redskins. The law is now different. But it definitely did cause some controversy in law review articles and in court cases.
I get the sense, you were talking about the parallels that we're at now. I get the sense that Jewish culture is very morbid these days, right? There's no J-Dub. There's no Hebrew Hammer movie. There's no arguing over like everyone loves a Jewish girl t-shirts from like Urban Outfitters. Am I nostalgic for like an imagined past, or are we really like in a decline of really great Jewish culture?
I mean, I would say yes and no. I do think there was something really unique. I think when Heeb started in 2001, they printed its first issue in 2002. J-Dub was started in 2002. Mm-hmm. They more or less coexisted for the period of the 2000s together. And I mean, the way that I experienced it at the time was that each of these efforts had a sort of a multiplier effect, right? Like they created more spaces.
Absolutely. There was so much spillover of so many other things.
And there was a Hebrew beer, and there was right? And so you would go to a Heeb party. And
speaking about Heeb parties, I went to the launch party. I'm from Montreal, and I was living in Montreal, but I was in New York in the fall of 2005, and I went to the launch party for the Heeb sex issue. And it is notable because I was like with a friend and it was not happening for me. I was just like in the middle of whatever. And then I was talking to somebody online over the past little while, and I was like, I'm in New York now. Let's get together and let's hang out. And that was the first date that I had with who eventually became my wife. So because I wasn't actually talking to anybody at the Heeb launch party that night in the fall of 2005, I was like, oh, let's go and hang out with who then became my wife.
I have heard many stories as Heeb has been revived of people who, through some form or fashion, have found a significant other in the Heeb community or sort of because of Heeb. I do think a lot of people feel like the space that Heeb created, both literal physical space at the events, but also the space in the pages, has not been replicated. Like we haven't seen anything like it. And, Heeb magazine stopped printing after 2010, and J-Dub basically at the same year also stopped, sort of went out of business. And I remember thinking at the time, it's like philanthropy had helped bring these two incredible projects, into the world. And, it's not easy to build something, right? That having been said, I mean, look, it's not like Jews have stopped being, present in popular culture. I mean, what I think was different, part of the ethos of Heeb, and if you want to throw J-Dub into it, is that they were really operating as sort of part of subcultures and created, subcultures that were full of really sort of interesting, creative people that didn't, sort of fit into the mold that the Jewish community, I think, is well practiced at serving. And that's what was really exciting about it. Jennifer Blyer, who founded it, she was a zine publisher beforehand, and she created a zine called Mazel Tov Cocktail back in the 90s. And that was, she came out of the punk community and had a real appreciation for that subculture and saw Heeb initially as kind of like a glossy zine, where it was sort of pulling different pieces from these subcultures and, bringing them to a wider audience. And so I think it's that subculture piece that we're missing. You can go on Netflix and obviously watch,
Jewish matchmaking or the
right. I mean,
whatever.
We haven't disappeared, but I think it was like that sort of Jewish community with an edge to it that Heeb really captured.
So I feel like the edge is gone because of this like fear of being able to make something funny and as a result poke fun at something that we're at now. I mean, I'm curious, what plans do you have to say, well, how do we bring that edge back in a culture that is basically, for many Jews, is just fighting anti-Semitism, right? That's their Judaism. And for a lot of people, it's, we can't possibly make fun of any of this stuff because there are too many people saying this stuff for real that we don't want to make fun of.
Yeah. That is a reality for a lot of people. And yet for a lot of people that I know feels stifling, there's a real longing for this. So when we announced that we were coming back, and even through the process of, reaching out to folks who've been involved before and sort of to the next generation, I think that was a space that's willing to take risks was the thing that people missed the most. And, I would say he didn't always get it right. Sometimes it took risks that were probably a mistake or,
which was a risk that was a mistake? I'm curious, because we haven't talked about maybe just one concrete example of a thing that went well and a thing that went poorly.
I mean, the mistake it's most well known for was this, Roseanne Barr piece that was in this, I think the second to last issue. I think an effort to sort of satirize the Holocaust conversation and
by Roseanne Barr?
Roseanne Barr, wearing a Hitler mustache with a tray of burnt cookies, and it was was a risk, right? It was in keeping with the kinds of things that like Heeb was willing to go out and say the things that other people weren't going to say.
Stay on that question of like risks and so forth, because I'm thinking about, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the hipster movement and what it was. What was the hipster? Because there was that whole discussion I remember about hipster racism, and it was kind of a continuation of a longstanding comedic approach to bigotry, where you're mocking the thing rather than straightforwardly condemning it. So something like All in the Family mocks bigotry. To somebody like a Gen Z or today, it might seem like it's endorsing it because it's giving it a voice, giving it a platform. I remember that kind of world, and that feels like something that absolutely the hipster really went away in 2010 or 2008, whatever you want to say. Like there was some period of time where there were hipsters and then there really weren't. And there was a kind of more social justice oriented era that did not like the things the hipsters liked, even if there were even if coffee shops figured greatly in both. But I want to talk a little bit more about the hipster and what the hipster was, and whether are we seeing new hipsters?
I mean, I have a very New York specific perspective as somebody who's born and raised and still lives in New York City. I would distinguish, between folks who came out of very particular urban subcultures that were connected to a particular community. So like skateboarders and, people in the punk scene, people who were deep into hip hop, like those are very particular subcultures that were distinct from what we generally think of as hipsters, who tend to be...
That's not the same as hipsters.
Not the same. And the hipsters were more like, creatives who had graduated from, typically, private colleges, and who were, coming to places like, at the time, Williamsburg, to sort of, find a fellow community of artistic types who often ended up getting, sort of sucked into the new startup scene, or, right, some of these, became bloggers, right, all of which is, this is not a criticism, but what was interesting about Heeb, the way that what I always thought was interesting about Heeb is that it was in some ways a combination of those two communities. You had people who were genuinely a part of some of these different subcultures that existed in New York, and that was their world. And then you had some others who were less grounded in those subcultures and were more part of what you might categorize as like a hipster community.
So the new Heeb, is that, where does it fall in that?
It's too early to tell. Personally, myself and the folks that have been working on this now for a while are really interested in both rediscovering subcultures, but also platforming them. There's been a bit of a flattening of culture that's happened over the last 25 years as well.
I was actually about to say that, one of Phoebe's big words in talking about the idea of the omnicause, and the omnicause is the opposite of a subculture, right? If the omnicause gathers all things together and says, if you're part of this culture and you're part of that culture and you're part of that culture, you have to be fighting against all of this. This is the package of beliefs that you have. And subcultures, by definition, fight against that by saying, look, we have very specific niche ideas and beliefs and thoughts, and we want to stick with each other. We're not opposed to what's going on in the larger world, but this is our culture. This is our people. We're okay with that. And that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly what we're interested in, is finding, people who are building or are part of a community that, has a kind of, both a unique experience, but also kind of an eclectic point of view, because, right, of the community that they're a part of. And I think that still exists, despite the fact that we've lived through, a couple of decades where there's been a lot of pressures pushing against it. He always covered both, graffiti artists on the one hand and Jonah Hill, right, on the other hand, right? And I think those are things that are still interesting. They're both, sort of cultural phenomena that are interesting to Jews.
And to go one step further, I remember specifically them covering things that were very, very secular and things that were very religious, but were still cool and interesting and of note.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, at this point, it's a little cliche, but, there has been over the last 10 years, a lot of efforts to sort of penetrate the subculture of formerly religious Jews, right, who have left what they see as oppressive communities, but have not fully entered into sort of mainstream life and sort of live in this sort of liminal place, where they have this background of deep Jewish learning, and they're trying to sort of enter into, a more sort of secular space. Again, there's dozens of examples out there that I think are of interest to folks. So I think that's what we're excited to explore. Even the comedy world has, there's a sort of mainstream comedy world, and then there's a lot of different alternative comedy spaces, and a lot of those are the most interesting people doing the most creative things. And I think Heeb is really excited to find those folks and to invest in creator collaborations, in web series, in podcasts, and eventually, to do longer form projects, short films, other things as well.
I was just wondering how you're going to approach, again, contrasting these two periods, both of which I feel like I know as well as one might. It seems like what's happened since the early 2000s is the idea of apolitical art doesn't really exist the way it used to. Everybody's expected to have a stance, and if you don't have a stance, that's considered its own stance. And I'm wondering how you're going to approach contentious issues, be they U.S. politics, the Middle East, all of this. Are you just going to be doing stuff that's so specific and niche and interesting that it sort of is outside of that? Or is there a sort of a political mission behind it? How do you see this?
Heeb traditionally, and my own background, it's sort of similar, always had a politics, not narrowly speaking a singular politics, but that was always sort of permeated the writing and the artwork and the spaces that were created without being dogmatic, which I think is important and something we're missing these days. I also am just a big believer that art and culture are ways to reach a much wider audience than sort of having a narrow politics would suggest, right? So there are a lot more people who are, willing to, to go to a comedy show or, to watch a web series or, whatever the format is, even if they don't 100% agree with the person who, with everything they believe, if they find it entertaining, right? If they're getting something out of the art. And so that's one of the reasons I've always been interested in culture specifically, right? Because it, in fact, can reach people who don't agree with you. I mean, The Great Schlep was an interesting project. It was my first web video I ever worked on. And, Sarah gets 100% of the credit for why it was such an incredible video. But it was, aside from the fact that it was connected to an election, it was really an effort to use humor to point to something that was actually very serious, which was that there was voters in South Florida who were reluctant to vote for a Black candidate for president, and that we needed to have that conversation, right? And so how do you bring up racial bias, right, in a way that people who have racial bias potentially can hear you, right? It's one of the hardest things to do. But because Sarah's so good, right, with her comedy, right, she was able to take this, difficult topic and approach it in a way that made it, easier for people to hear than they otherwise would. And I think that's culture and art and performance and all these things at their best are able to do that.
When Phoebe was talking about the shift and when things were moving, I distinctly remember the moment that it hit me when we had a babysitter come to the house, and we also knew her, and she would come over for Shabbat dinners, and she brought us a pin to put on the kids' stroller, because we had been talking about this, and I was sort of not quite on the up and up with the concept, and the pin said, "Consent is so sexy," and I was like, I don't think that it is. And you're trying.
But is that the issue with putting it on a stroller?
No, it wasn't that. It ended up on the stroller because we had been talking about it. And I was like, I'm not saying that consent isn't important. And, that's not something that we had been talking about when I was a college student, but you're a college student and you're trying to make something, cool or sexy or fun that inherently isn't. And there is where the shift happens, where it's we can't have fun with things. We need to need to, be serious about it. And I gotta hope that there's this moment when we can really get back to this idea of irreverence, right? Literally, to not be reverent about our faith. And the way that I see it now is that so many people are completely irreverent about Judaism simply because all they do is fight anti-Semitism. They're very serious about it, and they're not reverent about the culture or the faith or whatever it is. All they see is this thing, and we don't have this vibrant life of what it actually we're fighting for. And Heeb was that. And I think, like you said, there was this period of optimism. We just didn't think about needing to fight this anti-Semitism. And I'm really hoping that we get to the point where that can shift to where we say, yeah, this is what I'm liking, and I don't have to worry about anti-Semitism. It's there. I'm not ignoring it, but I'm also saying this is what I live for. This is what I do.
Yeah, 100%. And the nice thing about being in this position is I get to now talk to a lot of people who, were either fans of the original Heeb or are intrigued by the new version, and to hear what they're longing for. I'm going tonight. There's a get together. A few of our younger, sort of active members of the Heeb community are sort of pulling together a group of folks in their early 20s, and I'm excited to listen to them envision what are the spaces that they want right now, and what is the opportunity that they see Heeb presenting to them, including things like fashion, right? Which is, not always a space that we think a lot about, but in fact, is a really, I think, interesting and
Are you in a position to be a little like Steve Jobs, giving them something that they don't actually know that they want because they've never really been able to conceive of it? The way that the day before the iPhone, nobody thought to themselves, I need a thing in my pocket that is going to have all of these things crammed together. And, the day that it's once you are aware of this existence of you can do this, then yes, of course we want this. But I feel like so many, and I don't want to talk down, and I'm not part of that world, and I'm old, and I'm from a different era and all of that. But one of the senses that I get is that 20-somethings, especially younger 20-somethings, aren't even aware that that's possible for a culture to be what he was at the time, and that this, as I said, this vibrant Jewish life that is across cultures and across media is possible and can just be something.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness to kids these days,
I didn't want to say that.
But when we were that age, right? I don't know that we knew that it was possible. I mean, in some ways, until
I think we did. That's the thing, is that I remember being young and the age of Heeb and saying yes, of course we can do this. And I was part of stuff. We started a shul in Montreal that was just for students, and in the ghetto. We called it the ghetto shul. It wasn't the Warsaw Ghetto, but it was whatever. And there were people starting up magazines and stuff. And I was like, yes, of course we can do this. It was what we nobody told us that we couldn't, or that we had to just stay in our lane.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, again, as somebody who has kids who are, 22 and 18 and through them in part, or, somewhat immersed in some of these cultural spaces, there are different kinds of opportunities today for, creation, innovation, et cetera, including, what social media and those platforms allow people to do. So you have, I think a lot of this has been sort of corrupted by the platforms themselves in some ways, but there really is the ability to, if you are a creative person who wants to do something, you can just sort of go out and do it and sort of make something happen. There's a guy that I follow on he started out on Twitch, but now he's on TikTok, who's he's mostly in New York, but not exclusively. And he carries around with him a full keyboard, essentially a mini recording studio that he's he can mobile, that he can walk around with. And he just goes up to people on the street and offers to make a beat for them and have them, sing or rap or whatever. And he creates sort of, these original songs, with passersby just in the street. And he's just a guy, grew up in Albany, and, and he was into hip hop, and, and he's sort of self-taught, and he's, and so, that is also a form of, both creativity
it brings to mind the
community building and
the thing. Have you seen this? That our producer sent this to us last week, Michael. Slam Frank, the hip hop musical.
Yes,
the hip hop Anne Frank musical. Yeah, so it's that thing. But I feel like in order to do stuff like that, you really have to cut through so much other stuff. And it's not noise, it's just so much great content to be able to do that. They didn't have that at that era. In the early 2000s, anything online was like, oh, this is cool. And it was really people of the same age. You didn't have to like fight family influencers and makeup influencers and whatever else, all of these other things being thrown at you. You were able to just get through.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Look, I think, we're going to see, as we move this forward, where people's interests are and what's possible. Again, I think, my career has tracked media technology, which has shifted radically over the years. And I'm excited to have Heeb Media meet people where they are and meet the technology where it is, and not, we could have said like, we're bringing back the magazine, right? And whether people like it or not, like they're going to buy a print magazine again. And, we may end up actually printing an annual issue in a few years. If we get back to that point, there is definitely some, in the way that, that records have, made a comeback, as a niche product. I think magazines have also some of that, but we're not trying to impose, our own views on the community. We're really excited to see, what the community's wanting to create and go from there.
Excellent. I, for one, cannot wait for this to happen, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the stuff is going to be coming out of it. Will you stick around for Nachas?
I will stick around for Nachas because I have a really good Nachas that hopefully hasn't already been done.
Okay.
But I'm excited to share it.
Well, let's get to it right after this.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
All right, Mick, guest, you go first. What's your Nachas this week?
So my Nachas is a documentary film. Just so happens that I know both the creator and the subject, which is Sabbath Queen. Sabbath Queen is a documentary film by Sandy Dabowski about Rabbi Amichai Lau-Lavie, and they. In some ways, that they're very connected to the Heeb community.
I was going to say his alter ego, Hadassah, whatever her name is, was an early spread in one of the early issues of Heeb magazine.
Hadassah was in one of the early issues of Heeb, and Sandy is in the first issue of Heeb. And I met them in their first year, the first or second year when they just started this journey. It's a 21-year long documentary film project. It's been traveling the festival circuit. Sabbath Queen, if you haven't seen it yet, go out and see it. It's really a celebration of, alternative forms of Jewish life with some really incredible people.
Excellent. Phoebe, what's your Nachas?
Well, it doesn't have a particularly Jewish aspect, but it is related to the shifting of vibes and so forth. And I watched a new TV show, as in a new one, not a rerun. I watch a lot of old Britcoms, as everybody who listens to the show knows. But I watched a new Britcom for a change. Douglas is Cancelled on BritBox. It's 4 episodes. It's really good. I read a review of it that was sort of saying, like, you think it's going to be about one thing and then it's not. And that's all I'll say. But yeah, I enjoyed watching something that was made after 1995, and I'm excited about that. Avi, what have you got?
This has a Jewish hook because it was sent to me via somebody who got it from their rabbi at their synagogue, who turned this into a full page long, exhortation and discussion. And this is what we need for our time. I was not aware of this. And this is clearly like a made up thing because I cannot find the origin of this and who originated this other than just a way to put another tick on another day. But apparently March 21st is National Common Courtesy Day. And so this rabbi had done this for all the common courtesies in synagogue and like putting away your siddur and, not talking and not unwrapping, candies while the sermon is going on, all of this stuff. And I was like, you know what we call that in Canada? Like every day. And so this is more of a Bruegges. And I was like, why do we need in America a National Common Courtesy Day? It's like, because there's the absence of common courtesy in America. And as a Canadian, I was like, what is going on? Like, why would you need this? This is like, I didn't understand. And as far as, so that's my look, as far as I'm concerned, we should be exporting massive amounts of common courtesy to America at a tariff of 200%.
Avi, like, do you really think that Canadians are more courteous? Like, do you think?
Oh, yes. 100%.
Oh my goodness. I do not think that people are more courteous in Toronto than in New York.
Well, because Toronto wishes it was New York. But if you, I don't know. I just feel like there's common courtesies that exist in Canada that are so like baked into our culture that we wouldn't need a national day to commemorate or to celebrate or to think about common courtesies.
Well, fortunately for you, I think Trump has gotten rid of all the national awareness days. So
there you go. Exactly. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending March 22nd, Shabbat Parashat Vayakhel. The show is produced by Michael Fraiman, edited by Zach Kauffman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Fraiman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways we get new listeners. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.